you talked about, and I don't know, is this directly related to any of this, but you talked about the and again, I'll put it in my vernacular, the death of the white church. Um, it's is there, and you were basically talking about the decline of the white, that churches are declining. We keep talking about the decline of church, but it's happening particularly with the white church. So I don't know what do you mean by that? And then does it correlate with any of this conversation we're having around not only the browning of America, but even the challenging of Westernization in the church?
Yeah. So I favor the word decline. There actually has been, the word death has actually been used. The end of Christian America. Robert Jones, who is really doing some good statistical research in the DC area, actually I think he used the end of white Christian America with the death of white Christian America. So what I outlined, and this is more than 10 years ago now in my first book, was—
I love that you're dropping out this prophetic thing you just did. Like, I talked about this 10 years ago. So.
I did. I wrote this, my book came out in 2009, so it was published 11 years ago, but I actually was writing on this 2 or 3 years before that. Yes. So what I said was we were seeing kind of countervailing trends, and the countervailing trends in the church was the increase in significant numbers and influence, hopefully, but that was not at that time anyway. And the growth of non-white church communities, the Black church, the Asian American congregations, the Spanish speaking congregations, those numbers were on the uptick. Immigrant churches were on the uptick. And what you were seeing was the numerical growth of that community, but then the decline numerically within the mostly Anglo-white churches. And the examples that I've often given is actually in a city like Boston. What's interesting in Boston is that most of the people in the rest of the U.S. believe that Boston is a spiritually dead city. And that you shouldn't go there. In fact, when I first went up to Boston to go to seminary, I was told, you're going to lose your faith because Boston's an evil city where no Christians live. And, I was nervous. This is about, 15, 20 years ago now.
Right. Post-Christian, one of the post-Christian,
exactly. All the liberals are there. And so you got to stay away from Boston. And so I'm nervous about going to Boston. When I get there, what I found was a very spiritually vibrant community. But here was what was going on. You're right. The white churches were in decline. And in fact, I note in my book that there were so many places where these historic white churches had completely shut their doors. And they actually get converted into condos and community centers and bowling alleys and just kind of all sorts of crazy things because these churches are dying and they're declining. But you will have a church with 4 services in it. One's an Asian American church, one's a Haitian congregation, one's a Brazilian congregation, one's a Spanish speaking congregation, and they all share this one space because that's the growth edge. You're seeing 5 churches meet in one space while the one white church is in decline. So they're countervailing trends, so that the trajectory of a diverse America is going to hit the churches faster. And I joke that it's probably the only time the church is about 10 years ahead of society rather than vice versa.
Oh my gosh. It would be the first time.
Isn't that amazing?
We're so late all the time. It's so
exactly. We're always 10, 20 years behind, right? I mean, but this time we could actually be 10, 20 years ahead. And this was actually pointed out by Robert Jones in his research that showed in the 2018 election, 17% of those who voted, and this is the electorate, were identified as white evangelicals. 16% of the voting population identified as non-white evangelicals. So we are talking already in 2018, almost a 50-50 split among evangelicals. And it could be in the last 2 years, that number might have shifted even a little bit more. But we were already seeing a trend in American society where the number of non-white evangelicals was about to surpass the number of white evangelicals. Now, this is news for many because when you think evangelical now, you think white, suburban, Republican, that's kind of the stereotype. But if you identify evangelical as theological and ecclesial rather than social political, we are at a point where the number who could identify as evangelicals, people of color, are actually going to surpass white evangelicals. So again, countervailing trends. The number of non-white evangelicals is going up. The number of white evangelicals is going down. And what we're seeing is, again, in 2020, about 20, 25 years before it hit society, we're seeing the browning of the evangelical church. So maybe we can learn something and teach the rest of society, or we'll just kind of double down on our white primacy and centrality.